microphone for short people. How's that working for you? Yeah? All right. Thanks for coming out, guys. This is a good crowd. I'm super excited. As Bob mentioned, this was all a slippery slope into birding for me. I didn't intend to be a birder. This, by the way, is going to get all these pictures that you've seen. So it's weightlifting, it's a workout program, it's patience, it's a lot of time and energy that is worth every minute. You would be so close. Fun fact, it's also really great for using on kids that are in constant motion because you get amazing shots. They're wildlife, they really are. All right, so Audubon tells us that the Puget Trough region has 173 birds in it. So far, according to what I've been able to gather, we've got about 125 and counting. I know this because I started with the bird list that they actually had here at the historical farm when I started all of this. And then from there, when we started the Birds of Anderson Island Facebook group, and I started to geek out on this last year really hardcore, I made it my mission to know who's here. And so at the end of the program, I'm going to talk about resources. One of the resources that I have for you tonight is a big old stack up here of an Anderson Island specific birding list and actually sighting calendar. So if you guys want to know what you're seeing and you want to put more effort into IDing and knowing who's here and when they're here, free resource for you guys to benefit from a year of me geeking out. But what I did was I put up the entire Puget Trough region list, and I said, these are all the birds I know we've seen. What else? And out on the Anderson Island community and in the birds group, lots of people chimed in and shared what they had seen. So far, we're at 125. I'd love for you guys to expand that number, so get to it. And not to put too fine a point on it, we could do this all night. I'm thinking we wrap up at midnight tonight. Is that? All right. Well, I'll keep it reined in, but it's an effort. Just know that I'm holding myself back. So, what is it about Anderson Island that gives us so many birds? What it really boils down to is that we've got all the ecosystems, all in our tiny little island. We've got the shore, and we've got lakes, and we've got forests, and we've got fields, and we've got gardens, and we've got wetlands. And most importantly for a lot of these birds, we've got a whole lot of bird nerds with feeders that are keeping everybody happy all year long. Kathy Bailey and I actually, when I started geeking out on these birds and put together this poster for the silent auction at the Salmon Bake 2 years ago, she said she felt like there were a lot of people on this island that didn't ever intend to become birders, but became birders because, well, they're here, right? You put out a feeder, you start to see them, you hike on the trails, you're hearing them, on the water and in the trees and in the parks. They're kind of everywhere. And I think it's very true. I definitely am an accidental birder, and part of my gateway was having a camera and a wildlife lens that I bought because orcas. Could you blame me? But really, the most prevalent wildlife we have here is 125 species and counting. So I'm happy to see so many of you here. So quick question, how many of you would consider yourselves birders, people who try to ID and are really into it? Yeah? How many of you have feeders? Awesome. Yeah. All right, so maybe at the end of this, you'll have a little bit better idea of who's who. And because I could talk about this all night, I did narrow it down thanks to actually John Larson's wonderful suggestion. I was like, how am I going to talk about birds for only 45 minutes? He's like, Johnson Farm? Like, brilliant. So what you're going to see today is I've got a community garden here, and I live just down the street, so my favorite stalking place when I'm not at home is here. So all these pictures you're going to see are from the Johnson Farm, whether it's out in the fields, whether it's down by the beaver pond, whether it's in my garden while I was trying to pull weeds, but the birds wouldn't leave me alone. That's where you're seeing these guys. And so there's going to be plenty that are left out. Maybe I'll come back and do birds of the shore and get some help with that. See if I can pull in some of these other bird nerds that have better waterfront property views than I do. But the topics could go on and on. Tonight we're going to focus on the farm. So first, audience participation exercise. Let's see if you can guess who you hear. I hear sparrow. Do you know what kind of sparrow? Very good. It is a white-crowned sparrow, and we get them in the gardens all summer long. So the white-crowned sparrow is kind of my favorite, and I think it's because I've had a family or a pair that have nested somewhere probably in the adjacent garden, but last summer I watched one pair raise 3 broods of babies over the course of the whole summer. They were busy and very tired parents, and they just did an incredible job. So I had baby white-crowned sparrows all over the garden at various ages all summer long. You're going to see them in the gardens. They nest very close to the ground. I suspect that they're probably nesting under a lot of the buildings that are adjacent to the gardens. So that's one of the reasons we see them hopping in our community gardens a lot. Fun fact that while Mom is working on getting ready to have another brood, Dad's actually the one doing all of the feeding once they're fledged. So that division of labor is pretty sweet. And they're not the only birds that do that. I'll mention another one. One fact that I stumbled upon while I was putting this together that I didn't know is that about 2/3 of pairs actually choose the same mate again the next year. So, So in the gardens, we've got the adults and they're flying around all over the place. Sometimes they're taking baths. I got to tell you, I really didn't understand, I have now a deep appreciation for leaking hoses. Because if you've ever been in the community garden and you've seen soaker hoses that have sprung a leak, the birds are so happy. It's their favorite spots when you get that really nice bit of garden that's nice and flooded. They're taking a bath, and then they're getting up on the posts, and they're shaking it off, and too cute. So this is a very, very baby white-crowned sparrow. One of the things about baby birds is that the corners of their mouths are still yellow, and they haven't hardened yet. And this little guy was just too cute. I think this might have been the first baby white-crowned sparrow that I saw. And this one was from the third batch, because the sunflowers were already super tall. So they were perched in the sunflowers, yelling, waiting for Dad, of course, to come and feed them. And as they get older, they just keep getting cuter. So there's this middle stage when they're in their sort of, later juvenile period, where they get this red mohawk because their heads haven't turned black yet. So it's pretty awesome. They get some good head color going on. And so this picture I've sold as a print, and I'm super in love with. So this is Dad actually feeding the third brood. And I don't know if it's obvious at that size, but you can see how tired he is around the eyes. He's really kind of at his wit's end. All right, here's a different kind of who's who. Can you tell me what these two birds are? Towhee and a robin, that's right. I have people ask me, they'll describe a bird to me, and they're using all these keywords for color, and then they're like, well, how do I know who's who? And I'm like, red eyes. Those towhees, they've got some amazing eyes. So this photo is actually what started it all. I had my camera for about 2 years, and Tamron is a lens company, and they had just released a 150 to 600 millimeter lens, and I rented it as soon as it was available. This was the last day I had the lens, and it was the Monday of a Labor Day weekend. And so everybody's leaving the island. I went down to Andes Marine Park by myself, and I just started hiking the trail. And in one of those big trees that's, roots are up and the whole root system is splayed out, there was this parent robin feeding this baby. And when I got this shot and I got it home and I looked at it, there was no going back. This was it. This was when I knew I was going to start stalking birds. This is when I knew I had to have that lens. It was really kind of the beginning of it all for me. And robins, isn't that the right way to start? They're always here. They're always doing their thing. They are one of our year-round residents that we see all the time. Here at the farm, they're in the fields, they're in the gardens, they're on the rooftops. They're a really pervasive bird. They also can have up to 3 broods per summer. And they actually like to be in large roosts in the winter, which I've never seen. Have you guys seen a big roost of robins in the winter?
I have.
Awesome.
I went on my horses out back, so I see them, and when you're on horseback, the animals treat you different.
Sure.
The coyotes aren't afraid, the birds aren't afraid.
Awesome.
And a lot of those birds like to piggyback on those horses.
Awesome. Nice. Yeah, I hadn't seen them in big roosts in the winter, so I need to keep my eyes open, apparently. I need to go hang out in the fields. So it all begins with some nest building, right? So she was actually gathering nesting material in Eby's garden, which is right next to mine, and it was so cute. He had some straw in there left over from the winter. Right. How cute is that? So this was the robins. The baby robins are the first ones I see in the garden. In mid-May, they're kind of the first of the babies, and I really love them for that. This little one was just so fat and fluffy. Here's another one, right? This one's a little bit older, and one of the things about juveniles is I often see them hanging their wings down like this, like they don't even know how to hold their bird body yet. And so they just look really awkward. And then there's that industrious parent, right? So have you noticed that with robins, they don't just go get a worm. They get a worm, they get a berry, they go and pick some leaves. I've at my house, I've watched them pick up like 5 different things, and it's like they're grocery shopping, and it's all in their beak, right? You're like, how do you keep fitting more things in there? And they do, because efficiency. When you've got that many hungry mouths to feed, you're going to make the most out of every trip. And then the babies can finally feed themselves, which is so great. I got to think the parents are so relieved when they finally get some of those skills. I actually watched a baby robin that was hopping around in my strawberries, and the parent hopped over, pecked at one of my strawberries, got a good mouthful. It seemed to like be making, really intense eye contact with the baby, like this is what you're supposed to be doing. And the baby went over and kind of tilted its head and pecked at my other strawberry, and he was like, oh my God, this is how the food happens. It was one of those aha moments. And I thought, well, at least there's plenty of strawberries. You can have some, I can have some, it'll be all good. And then once we move into winter, the robins aren't going away. A lot of our summer visitors, they take off, but the robins are still there. I see them on the rooftops a lot, which I really enjoy seeing in the winter. When you get a good kind of grayish day and they're all sitting up there with their bright colors, it can be really lovely. Particularly when the leaves are turning. It makes for some beautiful winter views. And then there's this one time of year, I think it's about a 1-week period, where all of these caterpillars are all over the fields, and the birds just go nuts. It's super fun. Late October, early November, kind of when all the leaves are coming down, these caterpillars show up, and you can tell because the birds are all on the ground. This was the first time I saw a flicker, or that I recognized that I had seen a flicker, because they were mixed in with the robins, and everybody was foraging on these juicy guys. And then the towhees. They're pretty pervasive birds here too, and they definitely bring their babies to the gardens and make sure that they get some of that smorgasbord. They're bigger than sparrows, they're smaller than robins, but they've got a really striking look about them. But they're babies. How cute is that? So how do you know what a spotted towhee's baby looks like? Look at the eyes. because it's all there, right? They've got these bright sort of brown eyes that are going to make that transition to red. Because otherwise, a lot of baby birds, they're brown. They're brown. And figuring out how to ID baby birds is a whole nother ball game. I definitely got the crash course last year. But look at that. So yeah, it's the eyes. You'll definitely notice in the little ones that's the biggest indicator. This is an example of leaky hoses being appreciated yet again. I have lots of these shots because you drop everything when they start the bird bath. It's just too much fun to watch. And then sitting in the trees by the farmhouse, actually. I have no idea what he's eating there. I wasn't able to discern it. Grapes? Could be. Could be. All right, you ready for another one? I hear this in my woods all the time. Wow, that was, there we go. Just in case. All right, any guesses? It's a flicker. Yeah. Yeah. So flickers are all over the farm. You're going to see them in the trees. You're going to see them on the ground. There is at least one family, if not more, that have got to be raising their babies in the immediate tree areas. I suspect maybe the grove that's behind the chicken coops, if not in the immediate periphery trees, because I get baby flicker antics all the time in the fields around here. And you hear them, right? Like that noise at the farm is one that you hear a lot. They actually also really like the madrona trees that are across the street from the farm, and you'll see them in those madronas a lot. They eat ants and beetles, but they also chomp down on the fruits and the seeds and all that good stuff. You're going to see a flash of white in their tail as you drive by and they fly away. I think that's what I've heard most from people. Yeah, you know it's a flicker as it's flying away from you. And they use a call. Did I? Yeah. All right. So I was walking home from the farm and I heard this noise. How awesome is that? Yeah. Yeah. This is the noise they make when they're talking to each other in a family group. They also use it for courting, but it's their quiet voice, right? Like that high-pitched call is the one that you hear a lot, and you hear the babies yelling like that when they want food. But this is what they sound like when they're just like chilling out at home together. And when I heard that noise, I probably spent 20 minutes standing looking into the trees trying to figure out what was making that noise. And when I realized it was flickers, it was parents and it was juveniles, and it was very obvious. There were 4 or 5 of them, and they were just chattering away to each other. I loved it. I had a whole new appreciation for them after that. So this is in flight. I think they're really lovely. When you get a chance to see them, that red in their wings. There's also a yellow shafted varietal of the species, but we only have the red up here. You don't ever see the yellow. And so this is the love of the madrona berries. They sit in the madrona trees, and they definitely eat the berries. I haven't seen them eat any other kinds of berries. I've only witnessed the madronas. So this guy was actually in the apple orchard. I was walking home down the road and looked over, and he was peeking out around the tree at me, and I was like, well, hi. So yeah, they go and hang out in the orchard. That's why you see some holes in those trees too. And then the other place you're going to see them is they love that new field for parking back behind the grove of trees. Last year, I caught them, in that grass more than any other place. They really love it back there. All right, who's who? Yeah, what kind? Yeah, Anna's and Rufus. Yeah. So these are the 2 hummingbirds you're going to see here. And boy, oh boy, do we see them at the garden. So fun story about this photo. I took the picture, and I was new. I was just starting to ID birds, and I went out to a couple of different groups, and I was like, I can't ID this hummingbird. Who has a golden crown? And finally, someone was kind enough to say, that's pollen. I was like, oh, it's not a new crazy species of hummingbird. She just got really enthusiastic in the flowers. All right, that's pretty great. Things you learn when you're not afraid to ask questions. So we see our Annas and our Rufous hummingbirds all the time in the community gardens. They love Crocosmia. That seems to be the favorite flower. But I've seen them feeding on the beautiful big onion bulbs. They love those. There's a whole lot of different flowers there. The hollyhocks. I can't even name them all. There's so many. Fun thing though, I always thought they only ate nectar. They also eat insects. I had never realized that until, again, the journey I take through my camera takes me to all sorts of crazy places. So I had an instance where there was a hummingbird sitting on a soaker hose, and she was flicking her tongue out at the ground where the soaker hose was. And I was like, what are you doing? Like, are you drinking water? No. And when I finally got it home and I zoomed in and I figured it out, there were little tiny bugs down there. And that's when I started Googling, because Google is my best friend. And I realized that they do actually eat insects. So that was pretty cool to realize. For the Annas, they're going to have, on the males, a very bright pink head when you catch them in the right light. And their body temperatures are 107. 107, they're little furnaces. They're the only hummingbird that actually winters this far north. So all you people with your feeders, you're providing a service for these little guys, because there's really not much for them to eat except what is in hummingbird feeders in the winter. And in the winter up here, they go into torpor and can get their body temperature down to about 48. They can come back out of it pretty quickly. But their behaviors in the winter are fascinating. They're amazing little animals. But yeah, if you're not inclined to hummingbird feeders, but you have a little empathy in your hearts, winter. In summer, they have so much. No problem. But in winter, they're really relying on the feeders. So keeping them clean and keeping them full and keeping them warm enough to not freeze is also a big deal for these little guys. So when we see them around the gardens, it's actually pretty interesting because rarely do I see males in the gardens. It's females and juveniles for the most part, and they're in all the flowers. Every now and then you get the beautiful colors in their throats, and all the way up to the bitter end, right? Like this was late September, and those flowers are really on their last days, and the Annas were still making sure they were getting every last drop. And then we get the Rufous. So the Rufous are our summer visitors. They're not here year-round. They bail when it starts to get cold, like many of our birds do. And they really kind of duke it out with, between the two hummingbird species for the best spots. Fortunately, there's plenty to go around for everybody. You're going to see them show up in about April, and they really kind of thin out toward the end of summer. They're gonna have their babies. They're gonna raise them in the gardens. And then they're gonna jet as soon as everybody's big enough to fly and start to head south. They do migrate up from Central America, so it's quite a flight for these little guys. If you think about proportional to body size, it's quite a journey that they're making. These guys are actually tinier than Annas by almost an inch, a half an inch to an inch. But they're much feistier. They're much more territorial. They'll duke it out. They are some serious little birds. So with the Rufous, you're always going to see some sort of rust color in them, and that's how you know who they are compared to an Annas. You're never going to see this rust color in an Annas. They spend a lot of time kind of perching on different spots. They do like to the males like to be really tall in trees, usually bare branches of trees, and they kind of stake out their territories from there. But the females and the juveniles are usually on tomato cages. They like Jane's apple tree a lot, actually. At least on my side of the garden. They love those top branches. And this, that last picture on the lower right is actually the only male I've ever gotten a picture of. I'm sure they're there occasionally, but as I said, it's really rare to see a male in the gardens. All right. Yeah, so the wetlands around where the beaver pond is red-winged blackbird central. They're down there, they're building their nests, they're raising their babies, and then they're heading over to the farm and sitting in the rooftops and flying overhead, making that noise. You definitely hear them all the time. You don't see them very close to the gardens very often. And it's really kind of fun when this is one of those birds that telling the difference between the males and the females is really easy. The first time I encountered a female red-winged blackbird, I was like, that's a really big sparrow. No. It took me a while to figure out who she was because she just didn't look anything like the beautiful showy males. So many females nest in one male's territory, so there's probably only one male over there at the beaver pond. Lots of females. They do like to flock and roost with cowbirds and with starlings, and I've definitely seen them hanging out with all of them as the summer wears on. So this is actually in the beaver pond, and it's a baby begging mom for food, as they are wont to do. And then, if mom leaves the wetlands and tries to escape to a rooftop, they're still Junior, asking for some food. And she looks really annoyed in this picture, because at this point, she's like, you're big enough to be doing this by yourself. I shouldn't have to be feeding you. Why are you following me? Now, where you do start to see them in the garden is in September, when the sunflowers are all coming into their own. And everybody wants the sunflowers. I really used to always deadhead everything until I started paying attention to birds. And now I let everything go. Because I recognize that come September, a lot of these birds are sticking around because they want the seeds that are happening at the end of the season. Obviously, for sunflowers, you're often doing it for the seeds, but all the flowers, everybody's looking for all those last nutrients that you spent all summer producing. So it's really fun to see these guys in the sunflowers because they'll sit up top and then they'll tip themselves over the edge and help themselves. So it's a little bird tipping game. All right, here we go. Another who's who. Yeah. Yeah, who's on the left?
Male.
It is a pine siskin. Yep. Good job. Yeah, so pine siskins are super tiny. They're about maybe 4.5 inches tall. They have a lot of that same striping that you see in female finches. But when you see them, that yellow in their wings, and only yellow in their wings, is a pretty big indicator. All the other blurs, as we like to call them, the ones you can never see for long enough and they're always trying to escape you, they always have yellow in other spots. The siskins really have their yellow isolated in their wings. And so that's a really good indicator of the fact that you're looking at a siskin, and the fact that they're wee. They're very small birds. They're usually in coniferous trees eating pine cone seeds, but they really like to come to the garden from June to August. They bring their babies, water, insects, lots of good things. And yet another example in this photo of leaking soaker hoses making the birds really happy. I told you I had a lot of these. So this is actually Mom, and she is feeding 2 little ones. That's one of the little ones who just came and sat on my back fence behind my garden and let me get super close, because when they're this young, they don't know they should run. I love babies. They have no idea what this weird girl with the big black nose that keeps extending toward them is. They don't know that they should run away. And later in the season, you do see them coming in for the seeds. So when you're not deadheading your plants, you're helping contribute to the seeds that they're gathering. So the American goldfinches are seasonal visitors. They come in about April, and they leave in October. So they're here a lot longer. They actually come in and have this really elaborate, long time period where they're picking their mates and they're hanging around together and they're bonding. They don't actually start having babies until much later in the summer, because they're so primarily seed driven that they want to make sure that their reproductive cycle is lining up with when seeds are most abundant. And that's not going to be in June, it's going to be in August. So fun fact about goldfinches, they molt twice a year, in the spring and in the late summer. And that's because in the summer, they've got breeding plumage, and they are showing it big and bright and happy, and that's one of the signs of health. That's one of the things that helps them get a mate. And they do courtship feeding, which is really fun. I'll have a picture of that in a second. So this is an example of their breeding versus non-breeding plumage. It's actually pretty tough to tell the difference between males and females in the winter because they get more brown. The males don't have the black head or the black in their head. And then once summer arrives, you end up with them coming into that plumage. So when they arrive, they aren't this bright color yet. Their plumage is still changing when they get here in April. So they go through that entire period of changing their plumage, picking their mate, doing all their social bonding before they ever get around to actually nesting and having their young. So this is an example of courtship feeding. So the male will bring the female a piece of food, and she'll accept it, and then sometimes she passes it back, and sometimes he passes it back to her. It's Lady and the Tramp, bird style. And it goes on and on and on. And of course, there's those puddles that they like to come and take their baths in. I spent many, many hours enjoying that. But inevitably, you end up with the babies. And then it's a really, really difficult, long road of constant feeding. And the thing you're going to notice in this is it's always dad doing the feeding. That's because they do often try to squeeze in 2 broods while they're up here. So once again, mom is probably on some eggs, and dad has full-time duty once they fledge and leave the nest. So lots of harried fathers with lots of eager babies looking to get fed again and again. The one with them on the wire, I have an entire series where the babies are hopping on top of each other. They're hopping on top of him. It's kind of the hop on pop demonstration of how harried these dads are. And those are just the babies. They came and they sat on my tomato cage, and we spent some time together last summer, and they were just so cute. I was really very charmed. Because again, goldfinches are also small. They're 4 to 5 inches. So you're talking these little tiny guys, and the babies are, it seems like they're as big as their parents, but they are actually a little bit smaller. So they're so wee. Funny thing though, everyone thinks that all they eat is seeds, but I actually have an entire series of photos. It took me a while in zooming in to realize what on earth was he eating on this dill plant, and it was aphids. So when they're at peak breeding season, they need the protein for their young, and so they do actually eat some insects during that time. It's a very limited window, and generally they don't eat insects at all. Brown-headed cowbirds, when they lay their eggs in a goldfinch's nest, most of the time those babies die because they can't eat only seeds. So it's not going to be a successful imposter in a goldfinch nest. But yeah, so aphids. Say thank you to the goldfinches for eating your aphids. We're all a fan. And of course, just as the juveniles get big enough to be operating on their own, there's sunflower seed season. So everybody's sunflowers have all these crazy little babies trying to figure out how to eat sunflower seeds. And you can watch that for a really long time too. But what I loved about this was during the course of taking all of these photos, watching the summer progress, right? And getting to the point where I have all these beautiful sunflowers that are open and vibrant and early in the season. And then more and more, you get to the point where they're getting their winter plumage again toward the tail end of when they're here, and the sunflowers are reaching the end of their time as well. All right. Anybody? This is kind of a tricky one. It's important though, because we see the cedar waxwings all the time, and that really high-pitched chirp that they have is absolutely how you know that they're in the trees that you can't see. Nobody else has a pitch that's as high and as sustained as them, and they like to flock together. So you end up with lots of that, those high pitched chirps all at once. So the cedar waxwings are here for one thing and one thing only, and that is to eat all of your berries. My berries, your neighbor's berries. There's no escape. They actually migrate following the berries. So everywhere along the way, they're heading to the next place because that's where the berries are going to be. They're usually in the woods, but boy oh boy are they in the gardens. They're in the gardens until the raspberries and salmonberries give it up, and then they're in the woods eating the blackberries and the huckleberries and the madrona berries. So they don't actually leave until October, kind of the end of October, because the berries here do continue that long, and they might as well make the most of it. They're primarily monogamous, which is kind of charming in a small bird. You don't get a lot of those. So they also do courtship feeding. So early in the year, when I first saw them, I was like, oh, look, it must be feeding babies. No, way too early for babies. So they will pass food back and forth as well. Look at that beautiful raspberry. That was probably mine. My favorite thing about these guys is they're just so striking, right? They've got a style that you just can't beat. The dude with his sunglasses and his feathers that you can't see individual feathers. Like, they look like they're airbrushed, and they're really fun birds. And the babies, they have so much attitude. So this set of three was sitting on top of the gate right in front of Jane's garden, and I was trying to go through the gate, and they were just like, yo. Like, I don't think you're going through this gate. It was really funny. We had quite a standoff. So many of you have seen this picture. I put it on the cover of the Nature Journal that I created, and I love them. But what most people don't know is that there's an entire series of these guys, because this went on and on and on. I spent 20 minutes sneaking up on these guys, getting as close as I could, and in that time, they were yelling at each other, they were ignoring each other, they were looking at bumblebees going by, they were grooming, they were shoving each other. It was so great. Yeah, there was so much cute. All right, so I'm gonna book it through this. Bear with me, because I don't want to keep you too long. Barn swallows we see in the summer. They're only here from May to August. When they arrive, everyone celebrates because they're super fun to see. They actually come up from as far away as South America, so they've got quite a commute both directions, which is why they're here for such a short time. Fun fact about barn swallows, though. Their older broods from a summer actually help feed and take care of the younger ones. They'll go through 2 or 3 batches of babies, and they're so community oriented that the younger siblings actually, or the older siblings actually help feed the younger siblings, which is pretty cool. And then the violet green swallows, which are so dramatic. They're just lovely birds. So the barn swallows put those mud nests up in all the corners. They're at the ferry dock, they're in all the buildings around here. But the violet green swallows love all the bird houses. So typically if you're seeing swallows in a birdhouse, it's the violet green ones, which is nice because these 2 sets of swallows can actually hang out together in this space and not be competing for nest space. That's going to be the biggest thing that would drive them apart. Instead, we get swallows all the time, everywhere. Around the farm. And who can resist these faces, right? They're popping out of the bird houses. Parents are desperately trying to feed them with all their beautiful colors. And this looked so great, right? I was like, oh, look, you're getting fed. Until you realize that it was a trap. Look at that. I can swallow your whole head. I was like, that's a mutant baby right there. But it makes sense. He needs to be an efficient eating machine because he's got a lot of eating to do to get to, where he's going. Another one we see in the gardens periodically are the black-headed grosbeak. I know people see them at their feeders, but we've seen them hanging out in the gardens at various times. The female is the big one, and actually what I learned recently is that the males don't reach sexual maturity for 2 years. So this is probably a first-year male. You'll see that he's not completely black. He still looks a little bit mottled. He's not fully grown into his colors yet. The western tanager, every now and then we see, and they're usually eating the berries. That has been my observation. And so the male is the big one with the bright colors. The female is, I caught her from all the way across the garden because I was like, you were goldfinch colored, but the wrong size. She was way too big to be a goldfinch. So I managed to snap some pictures and then figure out who she was. It was really exciting. Olive-sided flycatchers, we get them here, and as far as the farm goes, I usually see them in the very top bare branches of the trees on the walk down to the beaver pond. So those trees that are along there, they're often, because that open field is a perfect place to catch all the bugs. This was my favorite. So last winter, I was hiking around and I went to the beaver pond and I realized there was this nest that was right above the bench sitting there, right? Like I was like, how did I not notice this? Well, the trees were leaved out. You didn't see it. This spring when I came back, I actually saw what was building it, and it's a warbling vireo. And given that it happened 2 years in a row, I think right there in that marshland area around the beaver pond, the warbling vireos love to build their nests. So keep an eye when you're down there. The nests are really obvious. They're only about 3 or 4 inches wide, but they're really unique in the way that they are wrapped around the branches. And these little birds are so cute. They're super endearing. All right. Sometimes we get birds for migrations, and I was actually just talking with Brian about the fact that we get Cooper's hawks and sharpshin hawks. We get the sharpshin, though, at only in April and September and October. And that's because they're on their way to someplace and on their way back from someplace. So they're really just passing through. If you happen to see them, you're really lucky. What do sharpshin hawks eat? Little birds. Isn't the farm the perfect place to swing by and grab a snack? It kind of is. Yeah, so sharp-shinned hawks sit in the branches of the trees that are all around the perimeter of the property, and you see them on the rooftops in the early fall because they are scoping out what's for dinner. And then a few more year-round guys, the red-breasted sapsuckers, we see them a lot. The rufous hummingbirds actually kick it with them a lot because they really want where the sap holes are. They like to drink the sap out of the sap holes. So they're kind of best friends. They're only on the West Coast, though. You're not going to see a red-breasted sapsucker anywhere else. So when the apple trees start to turn, for the apples that haven't been picked, these guys are all over that. They're definitely super excited about rotting apples. And then in flight, they're just so lovely. And then in the summer, I actually got a baby. We had a little tiny red-breasted sapsucker baby show up at the farm. And this was, again, because my garden's near Jane's. It was on that gate. So it was just hanging out on the gate, looking around with that derpy face, like, I don't know what you are. Why are you walking toward me? It was pretty great. The dark-eyed juncos we see a lot of. That flash of white in their tails is pretty signatory. They're tiny birds. They're about 4 inches. You're going to see them on the ground a lot. They tend to flock. As a baby, they're so cute. And that white eye ring is pretty distinctive as a baby with all these little brown baby birds. That white eye ring and the pink beak are the two distinguishing features that tell you it's a baby junco. I know. And then as they get older and they're looking for seeds and they're kind of digging around. The purple finches, I hear that they're here year-round. I've never seen them other than in the garden, kind of during mating season showing off. They're very cool. And they're kind of hard to distinguish from house finches. So when I first started IDing birds, I actually put this up on the birding group because I was like, okay, I've now figured out how to tell the difference between them. Let me make sure everybody knows. With the purple finches, the males have red along their back and red that go into their wing bars. And that's really the big difference. When you see a house finch, their wing bars are always white. And the red really doesn't go into their backs. The purple finch is more raspberry colored, but you can't always tell that when you're looking at them. But quick ID help there. So these babies are also ridiculously cute. And so on the left, you're seeing a female, and on the right, you're seeing a male, because you can see the color already starting to come into his head, even as young as he is. Okay, they're also super territorial when they're mating. So I got this amazing series where this dude is really trying to tell somebody what time it is. Like, this is my territory. This was all for a robin that was sitting next to him. He needed to make sure the robin knew, this is my territory. We also see Pacific wrens. They're usually in the grasslands, they're around the marshes, super tiny, super cute. And the biggest rule of thumb whenever you're here is don't forget to look up, because the big boys, they're flying overhead all the time. I see osprey, I see eagles, I see red-tailed hawks, and I even see the occasional vulture, turkey vulture. Turkey vultures you're really only going to see in the spring and early summer, but they're up there, and a lot of times I'm looking at all the tiny birds around me, and I have this oh my goodness moment where I'm lifting my lens into the sky and trying to track something that's flying right overhead. All right, quick round of let's play Who's That Baby? Nope. How about that eye color? That's a towhee. Look at that. That's who he's going to become. You can also see the spots in the wing now that I'm showing you. The spots when they're a baby are light brown, but they turn white over time. All right, how about this one? It's a junco. Yep. All right, how about this one? That's a pine siskin. Yep, that yellow in the wings. All right, how about this one? Yep, that is our white-crowned sparrow in all of his cuteness. All right, last one. It's our robin. All right. Quickly, let's give you some resources. There's books. There's lots of books, guys. If you want to be a book geek, there's lots of good ones. One of the things you can do is join the Birds of Anderson Island Facebook group if you haven't already. We are all posting all the time with different bird pictures or just observations, right? Here's who I saw today, and this is what they were doing. We've got more than 150 people in the group. It's kind of amazing and really cool that many people want to come and geek out with us. So if you type Birds of Anderson Island into the search bar, you can then join the group. It's pretty easy to find. There's another group that I love that is the Pacific Northwest Birders group. So that's, generally our region, but it's people that aren't on the island, and they're seeing sometimes a lot more than we are. They're also a great resource to help you ID if you're having a tough time figuring something out. I'm a big fan of Cornell's All About Birds website. I go there a lot for IDs, for species facts. All those bird calls you heard came from them. They're a pretty great resource. eBird is also from Cornell, and this is the big database, right, guys? Everyone contributes their bird sightings to this database, and you can actually get visualization maps of who's here when. I can look up any city that I'm going to see what birds I might be seeing and who might be there when I'm there. There's also an app, so if you want to submit bird checklists and continue to increase their data points about our island or anywhere you go, it's really fun. They make it super easy with the app to be able to track your stuff and have your lists. I love Merlin. This is how becoming a birder and wanting to ID things was accessible to me. So in 5 steps, I can get some answers on what bird I might be seeing. I start my ID, I pick my location, I tell them what the date is, I pick the size relative, I pick some colors that I might be seeing, and then what's it doing? And from that, I get a list of birds that I can scroll through where I get pictures and descriptions, and I can dig in to get more details. And 85 or 90% of the time, more than that usually, it's going to guess the bird. There's some obscure ones that doesn't get, but this is absolutely the way to go if you've got a smartphone and you're just starting, because it's so visual, it's so easy, and it gives you that ability, that reference point for who might be similar, right? Similar size, similar behaviors, and it really starts to help you understand what your narrower choices of what those birds could have been are. And then there's the Anderson Island bird list and sighting calendar. So this was my step 1. My goal long term when I have time is to actually put together a birding book that's specific to our island. And I've had lots of people in the community that say that they'd love to contribute to that. And so the goal is eventually to build that. Until then, I can tide you over with a birding checklist of all the birds we know we see here, in addition to everything that's in the Puget Trough, right? So if you find one of those 50 birds that we haven't seen here yet, you can let me know, and I'll update the checklist as for what we've seen on the island. The other thing it's got a calendar of like those bits that you were seeing down on this presentation of when the birds are here. So for the ones that are migratory, for the ones that are only here during the summer or leave during the summer and are only here during the winter months, you're going to get a sense of that. So it's a nice cross-reference if you're seeing a bird to be able to narrow down the window of time when they might be here. And that's what I got. I really could talk all night long, guys. All right, any questions? Yeah.
Another good resource is Wild Birds Unlimited.
Awesome.
They give you information about everything.
Very cool.
And that's where they got a great place. I've got a big feeder in my yard, and I got it from Wild Birds
Nice.
Unlimited.
Nice. Yeah, for all you guys who like to do feeders, it's good to have resources for that as well. Yeah. Yeah.
And I went outside, and I'm on 109, and on 108, there's all these tall, there must have been 50 crows up there.
Wow.
Calling and moving around. And I put it on Facebook because I go to the crow convention.
Yeah.
I mean, it was unreal.
Nice.
It was unreal.
Nice. Yeah. Does anybody know, is there actually a place that they roost here on the island? Does anybody know? Like a big congregation?
They're not usually there.
Okay.
That's the thing. They've been there
Yeah.
one time.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, I mean,
Right outside my bedroom window.
yeah. I mean, they usually roost together, so there's got to be some place probably on the island where they all go. I mean, there's enough, open space that isn't habitated.
It's the American crow because they're really big. Otherwise, they're just
I
flat.
couldn't see them. They were just
Yeah. Very cool. That had to have been a really neat experience. Any other questions? All right. Well, I've got a table of all sorts of prints and magnets and nature journals and other stuff up here if you are interested in coming and taking a look. Down here in the front are the free bird lists and sighting calendars. Feel free to grab one on your way out. Use it, love it. Report back. I want to hear if you see things that we don't have marked yet. And thank you so much for coming, guys. I really appreciate it.